Good evening. Welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science, obviously. Hopefully, lots of you have been here before, but if you haven't, tonight we're talking about residential construction, what residential construction can learn from the commercial industry. So, I am Emily Mottram. I'm having my first beer in a long time. I'm actually going to show you my backup beer because this one is from Russ at Sierra Pacific. It is an Upper Pass by Vermont Brewery, and I'm super excited to be back on the beer train tonight with all of you. BS and Beer is an independent grassroots movement. Everybody on here volunteers their time willingly. So thank you to all of our guests and all of our panelists and all of our hosts for volunteering their time to make this show happen every week. And we want to give a big shout out and thank you to Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building for being our media sponsor. Make this happen with you on Zoom live and a repeat up on the YouTube channel afterwards. So thank you for everyone for tuning in tonight. Off to you, Ben, for some announcements.
Okay, so if you're new to this, you can find your chat box below by clicking on chat. It's very important that when you're in the chat that you set it to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see it. You can also feel free to private message between other participants if you feel like it. Fine Home Building sends out a Zoom reminder each week. If you want to receive those as well as other information, join our mailing list at thebsandbeershow.com or check out the weekly post at Green Building Advisor. The video recording of tonight's show will be available at GBA, Green Building Advisor, and we encourage you to continue the conversation over there. All past shows can be found on YouTube and through a link at the BS and Beer Show. If you have burning questions that we don't get to or just feel like adding something into the conversation, hop on to GBA and throw it in the comments. An audio-only version of the BS and Beer Show is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Special announcement.
I got a question.
You may have heard the Pretty Good House team is writing a book. They are looking for some case studies to include in it. If you have designed or built what you might consider a pretty good house, submit your project through the link shared in the chat box below. There's also some additional links for associated organizations and topics, as well as some links to some of the work published by our esteemed panelist, Mr. Doug Horgan here, that can relate to some of tonight's discussion. And with that, off to Travis.
Good evening. I'm Travis Brungard. I'm in Prairie Village, Kansas. I'm drinking a Deschutes Fresh Haze tonight. And on the leadership of the illustrious Ben Bogey, I went ahead and grabbed the backup in the Rockwell koozie for second drinks. This show tonight is exciting to me because the idea came to us from Nick Berger and Dan Hines. The BS and Beer DC chapter suggested this topic, and we're fortunate to have such a great panel, as well as a guest from the DC group, our good friend Doug Horgan, the quiet genius. Doug Horgan is Vice President of Best Practices at BOA in Washington, D.C. He has 30 years of experience in the fields of carpentry, warranty troubleshooting, and instruction. Doug is a frequent contributor to the Journal of Light Construction, Pro Tradecraft, Fine Home Building and Remodeling, and the Professional Remodeler magazine. So, Doug, thank you for joining us. I see you're, as usual, repping your Washington spirit. What can you add to the introduction? What do people not know about Doug Horgan?
That was already too long. Yeah.
No fun fact?
Not much. We'll see. It's I know Bob and Rick actually know a lot about commercial construction. I know the things that I learned after I started trying to follow commercial construction, so hopefully that'll be a little bit helpful at least.
Well, I think so. I think that's the bridge, man. Thanks for joining us. Next up, I'll introduce Bob Kovacs, who is Senior Pre-Construction Executive with Gilbane Building Company in Atlanta. He's been heavily involved in trying to address the skilled trade shortage, including teaching residential and commercial construction courses at local technical colleges and judging the Teamworks competition for Skills USA. Bob has been cracking me up already tonight. What else can you tell us, Bob? What's going on, man? What are you drinking while you're driving to Atlanta?
Well, yeah, even here in Atlanta or in Georgia, we have open container laws, so kind of restricted food that comes. So nothing too exciting. I think the drive home will probably at least through the end of the next show.
Stellar. Next up, Rick Thomas, a field supervisor with Construction One, a commercial builder based in Columbus, Ohio. Previously, Rick owned and operated Overbuilders, a construction company based in Littleton, Colorado, for 24 years. Rick, you're still based in Littleton, is that correct?
That is correct. I I travel. I'm a traveling superintendent. For the previous 2 years, up until about 2 months ago, I was a project manager. I was hired by a local company who is the sole contractor nationwide for a large furniture retailer, one of the largest in the country. And they uptitled me to make me feel good about myself. And
Did it work?
no, I learned how not to run a construction company. But to give them a little bit of credit, what they do works for them. They attempted to branch out into ground up projects, small ground up quick serve restaurants, and they're still trying it. So the company I'm currently with, they're well established. And Bob, I may be down in Alpharetta, Georgia here in about 2 months building a Nike store, the new Nike concept. So you'll have to slay a goat for me. Well, he's saying something. I don't know what it is. Anyway, yeah, so I've been in commercial construction for 31 years, off and on. As overbuilders, I was a mercenary. I might be a superintendent. I might be a superintendent and do the carpentry package, the hollow metal doors, frames, hardware, the fixtures, the millwork, casework, whatever was in the package, I would do. So, or at least I would bid. Or if it was just purely administrative, which is what I'm doing now, it's whatever they desire, whatever the employer or the person that 1099s me needs done on a project. So
something I can say from knowing Rick online for a number of years is whenever you'd have a question, Rick would always have some sort of jig or fixture or tool or something that inevitably would speed up and streamline the process, and always some sage words of advice.
I tried, and some of it not so sage. But by the way, my beer is a margarita because it's been a 3 margarita day.
Nice.
Only 3?
What's
Let's
that?
get it going.
Well, no, yeah, only 3. Got to be on the job tomorrow at 6.
Fair enough. Well, thanks all for joining us. I think we had a little bit of trouble with Bob's audio, and if that persists, we may have to go to no video feed on you, Bob. If we're still getting lag, we'll kind of give you a heads up if that's a problem, because that sometimes will be solved if it doesn't have to take the video and audio at once. Sometimes it clears the signal. So I think, was Doug going to start with the presentation? Is that where we were going first? Perfect.
So.
Sock puppets, or how do you want to start it, Doug?
If you can enable sharing, I'll put it up.
I think you should be all set.
All right. See how bad I can mess this up.
Just don't hit detonate.
Yesterday I ran a Zoom meeting for 54 people, and we did 3 breakout rooms, and pretty much everything that could have gone wrong did. It was very exciting. Now I'm a little gun shy, but this, if I'm not wrong, this is showing up.
Looks good.
Great. Okay. So as I said, I don't do commercial. I've learned a bunch of stuff from getting peripherally involved with commercial, and I don't want to pretend I know a lot about it, but I just wanted to review a few things that I've found very helpful and a few things that I've found surprisingly less helpful than I had hoped. So here we go. In theory. There we go. So probably something that most people are familiar with is Gantt chart scheduling and critical path management. I think it's if these words don't mean much to you, you're definitely doing it already anyway. And I think one of the things that's really impressed me over the years is there's only so many different ways to run construction projects, but just having a vocabulary to talk about them and maybe clarifying some of the concepts that you're already using is really helpful. So I've read a couple of books about this. I sent a link that I hope is posted in chat sooner or later, and it's just kind of a quick article of a bunch of stuff that we've learned and has sort of helped us fine tune the process of running projects. But Gantt charts are just a thing where each of these horizontal lines is an activity, and each of these vertical ones is a period of time. I think this is weeks, and then it just shows this activity has to happen before this one, which has to happen before this one, and so on down the way. So it just helps you organize that you're thinking about the whole schedule on a complex project. So I think most people are already doing that. Another thing that as a concept that I was introduced to and read a bunch of stuff about is integrated design process. And this is actually a pretty helpful concept, especially for people who don't seem to be on board with it. So the gist of if you read things about how integrated design process stuff works in commercial, it's trying to get all the designers, which is often multiple players, 5 or 10 people it can be especially on an infrastructure project where you have multiple types of engineers and legal people and all this other stuff, and you just try to make sure that everyone keeps going through the design process together, instead of having, say, an architect do a design, throw it over the wall to a structural engineer, throw it over the wall to a mechanical, throw it over the wall to plumbing, and then when you're building it you realize that the beam and the pipe conflict because it just wasn't all done at the same time, thinking it all through. And there's also the idea of having architects and engineers have a financial stake in the ease of construction, which can improve constructability in theory, or anyway, it no longer impedes constructability, which can be an issue from what I hear. And then I guess the thing I'd say about this is, the residential jobs I'm familiar with, we don't these are solving a lot of problems that we don't often have so much in residential. I mean, a lot of residential work is designed and built by basically 3 people, the designer, the owner, and the builder, and they're usually in the room doing the design. So I do think there are some architects we've worked with who don't necessarily have this idea that we should all work iteratively together to improve the design before we try to execute it, and exposing them to this concept can be helpful. But again, for me, it just kind of clarified, wow, I guess we kind of already do all this stuff, especially we're in we work design build mostly, and so we have financial alignment and design alignment mostly. So another thing that's been super helpful for me is education. I want to specifically call out, there's these things called the building envelope councils, which are in many larger areas especially where there's AIA chapters. The Baltimore and DC building enclosure councils have been terrific. I've learned so much by going to these meetings and just seeing commercial people talk about what they do and what they've found. So this is us at Blueprint Robotics panelization factory. It's a good photo, but I've learned a lot more from like the waterproofing guy or the roofing engineer woman who comes and just talks about what the latest things they're finding. And hail storms have gotten worse, so now they're recommending that you upgrade the protection board on top of your insulation. Just really simple stuff like that I never would have heard any other way. Speaking of low slope roofing, I've really learned a lot. I mean, I knew a lot about what went wrong, like this one, but getting to hear from the engineer who's in charge of roofing at GAF, she taught me 100 things that I probably remember 2, but it's been very helpful. It was probably 15 or 20 years in before I realized that there were manuals of details this thick, and the details say like this one's only good for 15 years and this one's good for 20 and this one's good for 25. I didn't even know that existed. All the roofers I know in residential just learned from the last roofer before them. They weren't reading books about it. So again, commercial, good stuff. Deck waterproofing and some of your more complex waterproofing things we actually have done reverse side waterproofing on a couple of projects. This is where you're pouring a concrete wall up against something, so you can't access the back of it to waterproof it later. So they actually have all these systems that you basically apply to the back side of the dirt or the formwork or whatever's going to be the back side of the concrete, and then you pour the concrete up against it and you're waterproofed. And that was something I didn't even know existed till I went to enclosure council meetings. Some of our bigger, weirder houses have bigger, weirder foundations, and I didn't actually learn much about this, but the team who built this house, I think the foundation was, I can't remember if it was like 1.6 or 2.2 or something $1 million, and took 6 months. We hired a commercial company. We had commercial detailers. It was all basically run like a commercial job because it was way above the level of, there's a lot of companies who can pour an 8 or 9 foot wall, and it's pretty hard to screw that up. But this wall, pretty easy. We're also doing a lot of condo renovations now. And again, not something I've become an expert in, but we've hired some folks who've done a bunch of them, and they're really good at steel stud work and doing it. You're doing kind of fancy stuff. The finishes and the designs on these are pretty intricate. There's a niche over here, and there's a pocket door around the corner here, and this is a humidifier outlet. There's all this weird stuff in here, and if you're good at steel studs, you can knock that stuff out. So it's good to have some folks like that. We actually just did a training on that with one of our better guys. And then when you're working on a house with a 20 kW service, it's complicated. So you're gonna anyway. So it's good to work with folks who know what they're doing. We don't necessarily hire an electrical engineer for this, but it's good to work with with electricians who do commercial. And the main differences aren't tremendous, but having the organizational thinking to know what you're going to want to do where and keep track of it later is much better than if you don't, because we've tried both. And there's an article that I kind of wrote up about some of this stuff. I was on fire because I couldn't figure out where something was landed. And I was like, people have to know, if there's 8 panels in the house, you have to know where the things are, which panel is it in? And that's the gist of it. So, God, I'm laughing so I don't cry. There's a lot of talk about how important it is to have a sizing for an HVAC system. But my experience is if you ask a commercial HVAC engineer how to do it, you will get a wrong answer for a house. And the example here is this thing on the right. This is a single master bedroom that one engineer wanted 1 3/4 tons of air going into for one room, right? And then the other engineer, he calculated it out at a 1/2 ton, which it's a big bedroom and all. So actually it's really entertaining if you ask 2 different engineers to size your HVAC and just see what happens. But one thing that is, a lot of the general rules and general thinking in commercial are totally different from what you do in residential. There's a lot of thinking about how much airflow you need for ventilation air for people sitting in every 100 square feet. So there's if I'm not wrong, there's a rule of thumb of like 400 CFM per 100 square feet. Is that right, Rick? Or is it 200 square feet? I don't know. It's nothing. It's like 400 CFM per 100 or 200 square feet?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a commercial mechanical engineer.
Good thinking.
It's about one ton per 400.
What does it say on the plans? I'll give you
one
that.
ton per 400 square feet. Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the use. But that's a ballpark to get started. Down here in the south, it might be more like 300 square feet.
Yeah, 1 ton per 400 square feet. Yeah. So, and that probably isn't wrong for ventilation air requirements if you're stacking people in a space. But if you're trying to address the shell losses on a well-insulated house, it's has nothing to do with what you should be doing. So we've just had the worst luck. And then you have like, I mean, everybody gets so mad when you're trying to tell them that the engineering plan isn't that great. So, all right, enough said on that. Yeah, so another thing that I think you guys can probably address, I think in a lot of commercial jobs, a lot of the builders and supervisors have this attitude that's, I think it is very useful in certain things, which is someone else tells me what to do and that's what I do. If I think it's not going to work, I write them a note and say, this isn't going to work and here's why, tell me what to do, and I just wait to hear. And you know, and this is an example of a job that was run that way because the architect, who's a total genius, like I loved watching him. He'd show up, look at something for 60 seconds, draw something on his triplicate pad. It was genius and really, really smart, really incredible artist. But every time they screwed something up, it was papered over. Don't tell the clients, don't charge anybody. We'll make this up for you on the next one. You know, I can't be wrong. And anyway, you know, like on this job, after we'd been beaten up a few times, we never made an issue out of the fact that the steel fancy doors were a 1/4 inch above the floor. And then when the clients bought a $5,000 custom made rug and they couldn't open their doors because there's only a 1/4 inch below the bottom of the door, they were mad. And they said, well, why didn't you guys say something? I mean, we knew it was wrong. And anyway, so I think, you know, in residential, you don't have to write and track 400 requests for information. You just call the person out and say, hey, here's what I'm worried about here. What should we do? And then you fix it. So again, and then waterfall planning is when you start with one person, then go to the next, then go to the next, and we just don't do that. So I don't know. I understand that could be useful. That's this sort of, you just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And it's probably important for liability reasons, and it's a smart way to run a company in a lot of ways. Lower overhead than what we do, but we feel like it doesn't result in the best product, so we kind of don't do that. I kind of already talked about that. The other thing I'll say is I probably read 15 books about lean, and I did learn a lot, and it gave me a good vocabulary to talk about stuff. And I went to our local lean construction group, and it just wasn't that applicable for what we do. It's solving problems that in our size residential projects we don't really have. It's probably great stuff for bigger, more complicated jobs, but it wasn't as useful for me as I was hoping. So that's it. All right, now let's have the experts talk.
You are the expert, Doug.
Always entertaining. That was the best. I really appreciate that. So
I hope the pictures were good.
Yeah, and you know, love the integrated team approach, right? Someone in the chat box was like, point to the person on your right. Like it's always their fault. Stand in a circle, point to the person on the right. Oh. So who wants to kick off the conversation then tonight on, you know, the two of you want to weigh in too? Doug, great presentation. Bob or Rick?
It's all about the scheduling. I mean, you have to keep a schedule. You have to, because without that, and especially in commercial, there are liquidated damages. There are always changes in the schedule. There is always added scope that has to be accounted for. Most of the time in commercial, depending on the scope, it doesn't affect the schedule, unless there's an outstanding RFI, unless there is just a completely blown design or engineered flaw, then and equipment has to be ordered, or there is something unforeseen. But the schedule drives everything. It drives everything. So you have to maintain a schedule. You have to have an awesome schedule. It's absolutely worth either hiring an outside person who the project manager, the construction manager can relay that information to, and they can put it into an effective schedule. or somebody in-house that's really good at it. But the Gantt, most everybody uses Microsoft Project, which I hate. Right now we happen to be using Smartsheet, which I love. It's so simple. It's got a lot of the same functions, but it's just better. I talked to somebody, there's a local guy here who schedules for PCL and Mortensen and a lot of the big players. He flies around the country. He makes between $200 and $300 an hour. He uses something called Power Project by Asta, and it's got all the bells and whistles, and it looks really fancy, and he knows how to use it, and I don't know anybody else that knows how to use it, but it's great because you can micro monitor a schedule and add all kinds of little processes to it and break down any task and incorporate it, and it's easier to use than Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project was never meant to be a construction schedule. It's for manufacturing, but everybody uses it just the same. And because that is the standard, but I digress. You have to have a good schedule. You have to have somebody that knows how to write that schedule, but it's all the other documentation that you don't like, Doug. It has to be on an official record. You have to have somebody tell you yes or no on a question, or answer that question, and it has to be part of the record. Absolutely. So there's in commercial, there's no such thing as too much information. It's just more information that makes the execution of the project more efficient.
Well, something that blew my mind when I started learning more about commercials, the fact that you guys have spec books. So, normally we'll get a set in residential, you get a set of drawings for the house, and there's general kind of vague ideas of what's going into it. And then we kind of wing it and figure it out as we go along. The commercial world, from what I understand, most of the times you guys have a literal book of everything that's going into that project, the assemblies, the products, and everything that goes together. I don't know if we'll ever see that in residential, but I think it's something aspirational to shoot for.
I don't think you'll ever see that bit.
Oh, Bob, your audio is breaking up for me.
Is
Is everybody else hearing that? Okay.
Do we have Bob's
It is a
audio
little-
now that he's videoless?
All right, any better?
It is a little better.
All right, so Ben, you're probably never going to see a spec book like that. A lot of effort that goes into putting one together. And you're right. I mean, we'll get 15 pages of specifications on the tape that goes on the joints on the water barrier on the outside of a building. And we were joking around the other day about you're out in your backyard sticking some blue tape and some black tape and some red tape on a piece of zip board, and let it sit there for 6 months to see which one you like best. Instead, we're getting the 14-page spec that says these are the 3 options you have to use. And then our waterproofing subcontractor is putting submittal together for one of those 3, submitting it to the architect. The architect's reviewing it against the specification, make sure it matches. When he shows up in the field, we're making sure he's using the right stuff. There's a third-party waterproofing consultant who's making sure he's using the right stuff, and he's sticking it on the right temperature conditions, and they're doing full tests to make sure it's not coming off the substrate. And there's 6 people who are signing off on this stuff, and then 6 months later, when it starts leaking, they're all at each other anyway. But at least everybody's got something to try and back themselves up. I put the stuff on a piece of board in my backyard, and it seemed to hold then, so that's why I used it. So it's unfortunately a lot of it's a liability shift. Everybody's trying to keep themselves from being the one who's at fault when something leaks. I hate to say it, but even commercial buildings.
Yeah, that's the thing I find kind of heartbreaking about the perspective of the commercial builder. After talking to you guys Sunday morning to go through this in advance, or Saturday morning, I left sort of sad because it seemed like the overarching theme was about
Don't be sad, Travis.
Liability.
Don't be sad.
Oh, thanks, Bob. You're all warm and fuzzy. No, it just
Hey,
seems like if the impetus is to try and do our best work and to help each other out when someone falls short, In the residential world, if the framer does a crap job and he doesn't get the wall flat, the drywaller picks up the slack and is like, I'm going to float this out because I know that we got
Hopefully.
cabinets on this wall. So there's a sort of let's make the end result work regardless of the failures of others, not let's find out who's responsible and sue the pants off of them. And it seems like that's what you guys are up against. And I don't think that's fair to you. And so that's what made me sad. It was nothing made me sad about seeing you, Bob. It's always a pleasure.
I know.
Well,
I mean, the difference I think is, what we try to do is like that. Is we tend to have a lot of checklists and pre-punch inspections and things like that. And especially now with technology, all of our superintendents have got an iPad with Henry, what's that called? Bluebeam Review.
Yeah.
Or BIM 360. Where they've got the drawings and they're walking through. And I'm talking to my driver here. They've got they got the drawings and they pull them up and they're able to put a little push pin on a wall and say, framing not straight or stud twisted or, missing backing or whatever, and hit a button, have it shoot out to the framing subcontractor, the drywall subcontractor, to make sure that gets put up or gets fixed before it goes forward. So it's that's something that you may be able to look at on some of your projects to avoid some of that stuff too, and not make the drywaller have to fix the framer stuff and the framer fix it himself. So he learns, because if you just let the next guy keep fixing it, he never learns that he's creating these issues that have to be fixed. So he's going to continue to keep doing the same thing because he doesn't know he's doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I think I've done commercial and residential work, and I think there are plenty of things to learn from both of them. But the spec book, I think, in residential projects, it's really personal to the client, right? And we've made home building, you can build your own home really accessible to a lot of people. And so we've kind of created this our own problem. Even you don't have to have an architect in a lot of places to build a house, right? So then to add an energy professional to come in and check the energy aspects of it, or to have MEP so that you coordinate it, right? Like, I think I practice integrated design. I was saying this to Travis because I did commercial work before, and I was like, oh, that's super valuable to know where all this stuff is going to go. And so we've designed things into our practice that make it easier to handle those things, because I did that before I do what I do now. But if you've never learned that, you've only worked in residential, right? And the guy in the field has always figured it out or run it somewhere, or you haven't ended up with a soffit or a chase wall somewhere where you really didn't want to see it. Like, yeah, I think Bob's right. It just kind of continues to perpetuate the problem. Like, why am I going to hire another consultant yet to get to this level? It's just tougher in residential. You're lucky if you get an outline spec that's kind of like, follow these metrics, let alone
you're lucky if you see a buildable window flashing detail on a set of drawings.
I was just going to say, I think the problem isn't that you don't get them; it's that they're literally worse than useless. But of course, I'm spending.
By comparison, we'll get 15. But by comparison, we'll get 15 different window flashing details for every possible intersection between different materials. And then there'll always be one that's missing, because somebody didn't think it through. You got to try to figure out which one's, the right one to use in that application. I mean, you probably remember back when all the EFIS stuff, everybody was getting sued because EFIS was, causing all these leaks and, water damage and rot and everything. Go look at Drivit's installation manual now. There's probably, 600 pages of details. And basically what they say is, install it per our book. And the first time they go out there now and find the leak and find that it wasn't installed, they say, well, you didn't follow detail 742 on page, 760. So we're not warrantying it. So, sometimes you're going to have too much information, but if they're going to give it to you, regardless of how much information it is, you better follow it because you're going to be held to it.
You guys think that this is driven by the inherent risk in the scale of projects that you guys are doing? Obviously we can be talking, Bob does projects that are tens of millions of dollars. You mess up a window sealant detail and that might be a $200,000 mistake. Is it driven by the complexity, or I don't know what drives it? And has it always been this way? You guys have been at this for 20, 30 years. Was it like this in the good old days, or
it's getting worse?
I think it's getting worse because you got more different systems, you got more different applications. Everybody's trying to push the edge of the edge of design. It used to be, just stick some dense glass on the wall, caulk your window in, and move on. But now it's, can we hang this thing, at a different angle, and have big firm beams, and let screen systems in, and all these different things that have never been tried before. So now you got something new that you don't have, 30 years of, well, we always did it this way and it never leaked. So you've got more opportunities for issues. But go back to your question of, is it a bigger, is it more risk on our part? I guess you could look at it the opposite way and say, yeah, we could put, a $20 million project up, and, we've got a $200,000 issue. You've got a $100,000 job, and you end up with a $2,000 issue. Who's hurt more? Could we have, not that I would like to, give up $200,000 a fee to fix something, but are we hurt by a $200,000 issue more than you could be hit by a $2,000 issue? So I think in both cases, you got to try to be cognizant of trying to, make sure things are put together right, and you're not creating problems.
Yeah, it's economies of scale for sure. I mean, a $2,000 failure on my job is a really big deal to me because my margin is so much smaller.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think that goes back to another question that came up in the chat box, or at least is showing up in this is, why don't residential builders or specialty contractors have the same kind of training? Like in the commercial world, there's a lot of training, you gotta do a lot of stuff beforehand. Like, where's the disconnect between those things? Like, is there just never enough money to spend the time to do the training, to do whatever? Or is it another risk thing, right? In the commercial world.
Training? What training?
You don't have any training?
No. I'm talking about the subcontractors whose bosses have bid this, and then they say, go out and talk to the superintendent. He knows what's going on. And they say, like, on the store I'm currently building, I have a structural steel storefront, and the kids come out and they ask me, so how should I do this? And I said, at that point, because it is another liability issue, means and methods, no. What does the structural drawing show? That's how you have to build it. And this is a real life situation right now where they did not follow the structural plan. I took pictures, put them on Procore, called up my office and said, this is not being constructed per plan. While it may not fail, it is not per the drawing, and they need to rebuild it before they get too far along. And every day that I came in, or not every day, but as time went on during the day, they kept building it, and they didn't replace it. They didn't correct it. And now it's a major issue because I found a note in the building permit that says it needs to be reviewed and okayed by a structural engineer. My office didn't see that. So the architect structural engineer, we did a Zoom video walkthrough, and there were many connections, many braces that were installed incorrectly, and they will not sign off on it, and we can't cover it up until it is corrected. So that is a schedule impact right there.
So you brought up a big question here, though. It seems training is a problem across the board, which we kind of knew. So I think that technically that question was just a poke the bear. But you brought up something that said you went to the job site, you took pictures of it, you documented it the way that it was, you went through. That doesn't happen. Where's the secondary review in residential? But it can,
right? And it should.
Sure.
And everybody needs to make time to do just that, because the legality in residential is going to become every bit as important as it is in commercial right now, because people are lawyering up. If something goes wrong, they're looking for anything and everything to get some money back.
It's funny you say that, Rick. I literally were going through final bidding and preparing for a construction contract on a project we're looking at right now. We sent them a draft copy of our contract a handful of weeks ago, and this isn't hopefully disclosing too much outside of school, but we got the contract back from their legal team revised with an additional 9 pages that they added to the contract, and it reads like a commercial contract. So you're absolutely right. People are lawyering up, and lawyers are getting more savvy about what goes into construction contracts. And don't know how we're approaching this right yet, or I'm not going to say how we're approaching this right yet, but yeah, it's a tricky situation to be in when you start facing contracts like that.
So much of this stuff, as far as the training and proper installation methods and stuff, is so manufacturer specific too. The problem is, how do you get that down to the residential job sites? I mean, I can, if I got a project that there's about to be, $300,000 worth of hydrotech waterproofing put down, I can pick up the phone or send an email and have the local hydrotech rep on site the next day and have him walk through with the installing crew. Here's what we need to do. And no, that's not clean enough. You need to do this. You need to do that. And he'll stand there and watch it. He'll pop by once a week, because at some point he's going to end up owning the warranty on that too. They'll also come out and do flood tests. To make sure that things are right before it gets covered up. It's kind of hard for you to do that when you've got a 200 square foot patio that you're trying to to waterproof. Could you get him out there in time, if you can get him out there at all? They might be able to get him on the phone, send them a quick picture or a FaceTime or something, which is still better than just not doing anything. But it's harder to get that level of service. And the same thing on like on a roof. We put a Firestone roof on a building. Firestone comes out there and signs off on that roof, because they're going to own, they got a warranty for the next 30 years, and they're going to make sure it was installed right. Try to get, Timberline, GAF to come out there and certify your Timberline installation on a house. So it's probably, again, because of economy of scale.
And it's got to be a Firestone certified installer.
Yes, sir.
I had the Firestone rep on speed dial for a while just to ask questions, but one of my first questions was, how do I get one of these 25-year warranties? And they said, we don't warranty residential projects. Which is smart, if you ask me. But
without a doubt, because there's no way they could possibly keep tabs on who's installing them all, or
Bob,
go out and do those inspections.
Have you ever run into reps who aren't helpful?
Oh no, never.
Yeah.
They're all a major asset to the industry.
I wish our reps would be more of a hard ass, because we've had reps tell our tile companies, well, don't worry about that, it's probably fine. And it's like, what? And you just call them up with the tile person on the thing and say, so you're saying that's warranted? Oh, I mean, it's not warranted, but it's probably fine. Well, why are you
put that in writing, sir?
That? Come on, bro.
But they don't want to, bite the hand that feeds them. That's what that whole situation is. You're going to keep that tile guy happy that you're not the hard ass from the product manufacturer, so that he keeps using your product and calls you back when he needs a consult. Otherwise, he's going to somewhere else.
Yeah, but I think that's it. So if you're gonna, we'll talk about all those things too. It'd be great to hear from Rick and Bob, to hear if you guys agree with Doug on the whole mechanical contractors. There's a whole bunch of things that came up in the chat box on that. So,
well, I mean, on any commercial project, you've got that mechanical engineer. Very few of your mechanical contractors are licensed to sign off on the drawings, nor would they want to. So we're in a different situation, and the guys that we work with are capable of providing the proper design. Not to say that every one of them is great. I mean, we've got some good ones, we've got some bad ones, just like everybody else. But I think it's a matter of we couldn't submit a building permit without a set of signed and sealed mechanical drawings. So we're kind of forced to do it. And like I say, most of the time, it's definitely more beneficial than having the contractor just wing it.
Or, I mean, good or bad, in the residential world, we often don't have any mechanical drawings, right? So they're winging it in the field.
A great set of mechanical drawings for me in the residential world is showing how many CFM per room, like Doug had before. That's a great set of MEP for me.
Yep. Basic energy modeling.
More and more in the smaller commercial world, 250 to 750,000, $1 million tenant finish projects, owners are demanding that mechanical installations be followed to a T, and that includes the path, the sizing, obviously the air balance report in the end has to match up, has to it just has to be correct. But if you add an elbow, you change the CFM, you're changing everything. So
25% loss.
they have auditors that come out now, and in every process, in all the MEPs, they make sure that the panel is the right size, it's the right spec, and they will ding you big time if you stray from what is on the drawings. There is no allowance for that whatsoever. If there's a submittal that goes out, it has to be approved if there's an alternate. Absolutely. But you don't even jog around an obstruction that they didn't see without their approval first, because it changes the airflow, and they just don't allow it.
You guys generally commission all your projects?
We don't, the owners do.
That awful service, Bob.
Third party.
I was gonna say, Bob, I think you're saying something, but we cannot hear you.
I'm in South Georgia. What do you want me to do? Is it better?
It is better.
Yes,
better
that-
now.
I heard
Now.
that.
All right. Okay. Well,
It's bad again, Bob.
street trailer. Maybe I'm thinking of. I mean, it commission. You don't want the fox watching the hen house. You want somebody else keeping an eye on the on how things are going. So the owner usually hires them directly, and they're combing through the specifications, doing all their own verification and testing to make sure that the project meets all the requirements. Especially when it's a lead project, or I did a living building project about 2 years ago, and the commissioning was just insane. But again, it's somebody else to take responsibility for saying that the building's working right.
Yeah.
It's something that's rarely seen in residential.
Yeah,
But
I
it
mean,
could
we
It's
happen.
a shame.
I
Yeah,
mean, it could happen, and the owner will have to pay for it.
yeah.
But
I mean,
if their house is warm in the winter and cool in the summer, they probably don't think about it.
no, they don't. Or commissioning. I was talking to a ventilation contractor today, and commissioning of ventilation systems is like almost non-existent unless you put in a Zender, right? So talking residential Zender, they come out, they believe in commissioning, and doing that at each port, and different systems that can measure pressure drops, between the different ones, and you're sizing it for the farthest away. But like, man, that never happens. So you put in these ventilation systems in these low load homes, and you just kind of hope it works, right? Like, and
Oh,
ooh,
I got some stories. Actually, this would probably be a whole other topic, but I mean, one thing I'll say is we had a client who's a friend of theirs does commercial construction, and they sent us a proposal for $17,000 to do testing and air balancing on their house. I mean, it was a big house, but that's how I ended up with a flow finder. Woo woo!
Holla!
I've got an Alnor balometer too, and it was exactly that. Nobody would ever. And my HVAC guys didn't have flow hoods. No, I'm
wait,
asking
where are
them-
the visuals where everybody's showing their fun, cool tools?
I got
Yeah, I
all
work
sorts
with-
of test equipment behind me,
Sorry.
but
We can do that later too. I mean, we work with 3 HVAC companies all the time, and out of the 3 of them, there's one combustion analyzer. I mean, it's I don't know what to tell you.
I'm an architect. I have a combustion analyzer. What do you mean?
You're
You're
cheating.
different.
You don't
They're
have
the
it for
ones.
All right,
architects.
super nerdy.
Yeah,
Just call somebody to check our combustion.
exactly. I mean, I do think it's fair to say that if you're building a 7 or 8 or 9 figure building, there's a lot more room for consultants, and there's a lot more risk, and it probably all adds up the right way. In residential, we don't have 700 details, and people in the field aren't looking at details. And we've somebody, I don't know where I heard this, but somebody said that you can do principle-based education. And I just think that's kind of the best you can hope for in residential. We talk about how, this is the way we do a normal window in a normal spot. And this is the way we do the flashing on all the different edges and conditions of roofs, low slope and steep slope. And when you want to run into some weird situation, you're going to take all these details and all of these details and think it through and do what makes sense using the principles that we elucidated in those trainings. But I just don't think there's enough money in most, even in our projects, which mostly start at 500. There's just not, there isn't $10,000 for someone to draw 30 details.
Make them $510,000.
There was a comment in the chat there about how this this doesn't happen because the clients don't want to pay for it. My argument is that we don't give them the option. And I know that's kind of an elitist thing to say, however you want to look at it, but it's don't give them the option. I'm charging you. This is part of my package of delivering your mechanical system for your home. I have to ensure for my own liability that it is installed correctly by somebody and functioning properly so that I know I'm not getting any callbacks. And you just build that into the price. Yeah,
to capitalize on that, Ben, I think it was it last week or 2 weeks ago when Alan was talking about, repeat the shop drawings and stuff, right? If you can't afford to pay for that or you don't want to pay for that, you have to build something that isn't custom. If you're going to make it custom, don't we all deserve the right to know that that's a durable structure that's going to perform the way that we wanted it to, right? You just can't customize everything if you can't afford to do that. And that, 10,000 out of 500,000 is, a very low percentage. You do a higher percentage for your server who served you dinner, but not for the house that you're going to spend the most money on. That's mind-boggling to me.
And it could even just be, it doesn't have to be a percentage like that. You put in 0.5% on a large project, you can pay for a lot of testing and commissioning.
Definitely can, but to borrow Daniel Tosh, eventually you get down to an audience of one. So if you tell every client, this is my process, this is my minimum standard, I don't cut corners on this, this is the only material I work with, this is the only system I trust, we only use Zender because it's the only one that's commissioned. You just keep reducing and reducing and reducing the number of clients who are hearing you. And then you're reducing the amount of good that you can do, because there aren't that many builders that are that committed to doing things at this level. And frankly, I don't think that I'm on Ben's level with his build. I'm trying to get there, but I keep reducing the number of clients that I get to talk to, the more high performance I focus on. And eventually I may find that I have one client, and then I can go out of business and I can rest on my laurels and stand in the soup line. So I totally agree that if you don't compromise on the basics, the absolute, the control layers, don't compromise. But if I go to every client I see and say, I'm not willing to build this for you unless we're going to commission annually, we're going to verify performance, and we're going to adjust, and we're going to tune, and you're going to always be comfortable, and here's my 10-year contract, I'm really nervous that I may not have any clients left. And I feel like that's the residential market.
But maybe you don't try and sell the 10-year contract. You do like I did, and you build in an extra $1,500 into a $70,000 HVAC system, and you buy yourself a flow hood, and you do a little research, and then you start commissioning yourself, and you get better and better. Doug's shaking his head. Why not, Doug?
Buy the $3,000 flow hood, Ben.
But you know what I mean, though. It's like it doesn't have to be all or nothing, because then you're already doing a better job than you did before, and you're in that direction.
I mean, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's not really systematizing things for the whole industry. I don't disagree with that at all. That's exactly what we've done.
But it's where we are and where we're stuck. That's.
I agree. There was money in the ARA funding for builders to have blower doors, and a lot of them in Maine had blower doors at the time, and they used them. And even though we didn't have to do that, they had them, right? So we took away some of these tools that made it easier. I definitely agree with that, Doug. Travis, I'd love to say that every single one of my projects has a Zender in it. They don't. But I have the certification to go around and at least do commissioning on the systems that I do have in. So I at least know kind of what I'm getting, even if I'm not getting it from other people. And I build that into my contract from the beginning, and my clients kind of expect that from me. Sure, they pay a little bit more, but they do it during the design phase. So they're not worried about it during the construction phase. I'm just showing up, checking on things. So
it's like the old adage of when do you know your prices are high enough? It's you keep raising them until people stop calling. Just keep
I think
trying.
this goes back to the economy of scale thing, scalability and stuff too. I mean, like, you look at the other company I work for, there's probably 20, 30 companies nationwide that are in that same dollar volume range that we're in. So when one of them decides to do something like 10, 15 years ago, when everybody decided to start offering wrap-up insurance policies, the other ones in that same group just jumped on board. Now everybody does wrap up insurance policies, and it's not, well, I don't want to wrap up insurance policy. I'm going to go to so-and-so because they're offering it too. So you can't get away from it. So we can do the same thing and say, look, we're going to do every project we do.
Every project he does is something super cool.
Consultant review, and every large contractor for those parties doing that. So it's one of your competitors, I'm going to say hundreds of smaller residential level, you could decide you're going to start throwing money in every project. Like you say, that's not going to work for you because the other thousands of them are not doing it. So it's hard to raise the entire industry's awareness at that level, unfortunately, because there's so many more players.
Every now and then when Bob talks, it sounds like the banjos from Deliverance. You guys agree?
That's just what he's listening to in the car.
Right when he starts saying something smart, it cuts out. So
yeah, right. It doesn't want you to say anything really important. Like
I
you get to hear.
I highly doubt you missed anything smart. Don't worry about it.
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.
But that is an important thing that we have to learn from the commercial industry is as products and things get more complicated and as our codes get more complicated, maybe we need to take a page out of the commercial book, right? Because I think you were right when you said it's going to get a whole lot riskier for residential construction. I think it's already there. Yeah, in Maine, they were talking about continuous insulation, but that's in the insulation code. But who's reading the chapter 3 where it talks about condensation resistance and how we're making risky buildings or the zip R, right? Like, okay, maybe it's good, maybe in this application, but it doesn't have the shear potential that it had on the other ones. So are you, and the product reps aren't coming out for a residential project, especially, Bob, not Bob. Doug, you're in DC. Maybe you have someone who's local because they have enough volume. But man, in Maine, like maybe we have one guy and he might be in Massachusetts.
Look at the size of the IRC now. Like this is when I started, it was a third of what it is now. Like this, we have to keep up.
Who reads that?
When I started,
only when they're coming for an inspection.
That's our only suggestions, Ben.
Yeah, and what your local code guy in that town you're working on is like he really cares about. Not all of the book.
You adapt wherever you go. I've been all over the West building, and everybody's different. You have to learn your inspectors, and you have to know what they're after. You have to ask that question before they tell you no. And I mean, that's different. You guys are working with your local inspectors, but Doug, how many different jurisdictions, how many AHJs do you work in and around Washington, D.C.?
It's basically like 5 or 6, but they're all really professional. I mean, each of them has dozens and dozens of inspectors,
but they also have their own.
Not like up here in Vermont, where there's 2 people in this town, and you just talk to one of them.
Right, but they all have their own little nuances. They all have their own little things they like to pick apart.
That's definitely true. Like the ones who were electricians are really focused on that and all that.
Yeah, if they're triple threats or if they just inspect what they have. But yeah, you have to learn what they're going to pick you apart on, and not to beat them, just to make sure that to me, failing an inspection is the defeat, and I hate it. So courtesy inspections come out. What are you going to ding me on if I don't do? So it's worth it. It's worth being proactive and preemptive in order to find out how not to fail an inspection.
I've got one tomorrow. I've got a pre-inspection fire blocking consult on site with the with the building inspector just because it's the first time I've worked with him. He is the guy who used to train everybody in the state. So I know he's going to be tough. It's a weird assembly. So I call and he said, absolutely, sure, I'll come out. So yeah, be proactive.
So failing a schedule or failing an inspection is a schedule slip. And so one of the questions on there is like, what's the penalty of a schedule slip and how does that affect residential? So in commercial, that's a major delay. And I think built into a lot of your contracts, you probably have like every day after a certain day, you start getting, penalty fees, right?
Liquidated damages.
That was the liquidated damages that Rick was mentioning before, and depending on the job, it could be $1,000 a day, it could be $50,000 a day. They've also got consequential damages where where it can say, if my hotel doesn't open on time, we're going to sue you for all the lost revenue and all the salaries that we had to pay for all these people to sit around, not being able to serve the people in our hotel. I mean, it could get huge. So yeah, you've got to make sure your schedule has adequate flow in it to make sure you're not going to get hit with those. And if for some reason you are falling behind because of a failed inspection or a delay on an owner choice or whatever, you better be documenting the crap out of it so that when you're 4 days late and the owner's standing there handing you a $40,000 bill, you're able to say, well, here's the notice I sent you that, you didn't get this done on time, or you didn't make this election on time. So those 4 days aren't my fault. So it becomes a paperwork documentation thing.
So is that something that should translate to residential construction, right? Is all that extra paperwork? And do we have people in our offices handling those things?
If you don't,
We're losing you, Bob.
Go ahead, Doug. Whatever
That's such a
Bob's saying,
shame.
we're missing.
That's such a shame because Bob is so much smarter than me and knows so much more. We actually did something like this. We had an on-time guarantee. And,
reason for it. I mean, I think still, like I said, even without that, the clients are still mad when you're late. So, damn it.
Oh, that's great. No, we had a program called On Time Guarantee, and it was actually like a passive aggressive. Well, I shouldn't say this at all. My personal take was it was a somewhat passive aggressive take on you didn't finish on time, because it was a contract that we said we would finish on the day we said we would finish, or we'll send you on a really nice vacation, like a really nice vacation. But your side of the bargain is everything has to be picked before we start. And we had, I mean, I'm not kidding you, it was less than 1 out of 10 clients would do that.
They'll never take it.
And we were really happy when they did. It allowed us to really produce stuff. It was way cheaper for us. It was worth every penny. We sent a couple clients on week-long or 2-3 day vacations, but it just didn't get much uptake.
I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I saw the chat box ding.
It happens. I think that, to your point, Doug, if we could actually see that happen in the residential world, I think that you would see residential builders willing to do what you did and be like, yeah, that's fine. I'll do liquidated damages. I'm fine. We're not going to hit schedule. We're not hitting the schedule on any of my jobs because clients are making changes or there's weather. And I realize, there's stipulation for that, right, Rick? In your contracts, you guys have built in, weather delays are
absolutely
part of the contract, right?
Yeah, you estimate how many weather delay days based on the length of the schedule, but you can add those. We are having an unusually wet spring here in Colorado, the eastern Colorado, and the company that I was formerly with, they have gained more than 20 rain delay days because it's been so bad. So, and those are written into the contract. There's nothing that we can do about that. And we just keep adding days. And obviously that's written into the general conditions. So that pays for more superintendent time, more project management time. And it is what it is. That's how it is in the commercial world. In residential, and I'm not sure, like a home builder, if you've got 15, 20 projects going at a time, I know that there are closing days, but I'm sure that they have to be written into the general home builder contract also. They have to be.
To what Doug was discussing before, I found my thought that had disappeared. We're doing a strategy now with the company I'm with, where before we sign the construction contract, we will charge you, say, $100 an hour for detail and design development. Once we sign a construction contract, we are $150 an hour for detail and design development. So that's giving them the incentive to try and get that work done before we enter in that construction contract, so that we can get it spelled out, because it's 50% more once we start, boots on the ground.
I think that's a huge deal that people should remember in the residential world. The contractor needs to be paid to do cost estimating. That takes a ton of time. And so I think this is the biggest problem. There was a question in the chat box is like, why do residential contractors not want to get involved? Well, that's part of the reason, right? You expect them to give you estimates for free. That takes 40, 50 hours of time on a small project, right? Doug, don't laugh at me. You're doing way bigger projects.
$250 a square foot. Am I wrong?
Oh, I love square footage.
I just weighed the drawings.
I'll back you a trailer in for $250 a square foot.
And so I think that's a barrier that people aren't taking advantage of. And I think the only way, Doug, that it works for you to get everything specified beforehand is if your cost estimator is part of my team, right? Because the biggest problem is I don't buy things. So we can help them try to put it together, but I don't know what you're going to get for a cost, which is why bid work should just not be a thing. Like, let's just stop doing that. And contractors should get paid during the design process to be part of it and to actually cost out and spec. Now, obviously in 2021, where pricing isn't held for like a hot minute, it's been a little weird, but, prior to that, and when hopefully we get back to a little bit more normalcy where you can hold a price for longer than a day, is that cost estimator who has to have done construction before, right? Like, they're not just the guy in the office, right? They're somebody who's done construction, knows how this stuff goes together, is getting paid for their time during design development to help that client make decisions. That's the only way that's going to happen. Then that spec book can be clean as possible.
Rick, do you guys see the thing that we commonly see in residential is where an architect, has a budget in mind as they're working through schematics with the client, and then they come to a builder and, we're 100% over what the architect thought. Does that happen in
all the time?
Okay.
Especially in one-offs, especially when there's a franchisee who says, well, the cost to build 3 of these in Boise averaged this, and they erroneously compare it to the economy in Denver, which is booming. It's not LA or San Francisco booming, but it's out of control here. It's absolutely out of control. And we say all the time, that's really nice that your architect went to this trouble to do this, but here are the real costs. And we welcome you to find, to compare them to anybody else, but this is what it's going to cost us. But this is an age-old problem also. This has been going on a long time. And the boom and bust cycles affect that also. When you're coming out of a recession like the 08-09 recession, and a lot of architectural firms scale back like everybody else. Construction companies scale back, architectural firms scale back. And one particular project I did, actually a group of them there, I white boxed the old Blockbuster videos, the 4 locations, and the principal in this architectural firm was just lambasting me and my subcontractors because he thought that we were way too high. But when we got comp bids for those, everybody was right in line. And because the architect was the principal and he did a lot of fundraising the previous 4 or 5 years, he wasn't really involved in the day-to-day. And there was just no reality based on because he got back into the game. He laid off 80% of his staff. And I don't know what models they were based on, but they were not based in reality whatsoever. But there's a reverse to that also. There are a lot of contractors that think they can get a lot more for, they think they're the only one that's been approached for this. So I'm going to shoot up here and try and get this price, and they get brought back down to earth as well.
I don't know how an architect would keep up. I mean, I guess when things are more stable, maybe it's possible to be in the general realm, but I've been doing this for 31 years and I try pretty hard, and every week I learn a couple of things that I didn't know, just about dumb little details and pricing. How's an architect supposed to keep up with that along with everything else? I don't think it's fair to even ask them, really.
Well, it's rough and it's hard, and it's part of the reason why we bring our contractors on at design development, right? Because I can give you a budget in the beginning, and I know what things are more complicated than other things, right? Like obviously, if we're going to start getting super detailed, super fussy, or as Travis likes to call, zero tolerance, right? We just want this to be really simple, but zero tolerance. I know that's going to be more expensive, right? But in our aspect, a part of the reason why we stopped doing bid work is we've worked with a number of contractors and we kind of know a little bit more about how they work, right? So we know who's a small volume contractor who maybe isn't getting as much pricing, but that maybe doesn't have as much overhead, right? Or who's a large volume contractor. They can get XYZ for a better pricing. Like, hey, you really got to go here. But yeah, no, I mean, after schematic design is over, if you don't bring a builder on, there's no way to know any of that information. Unless I was a design build.
We deal with, most of our architects have gotten smart enough to realize that they don't know what things cost, and they'll pick up the phone and call us or send us a sketch, or at least say, hey, I've got a project from 4 years ago that I did, and we're doing something very similar. How much it costs change? You should take a look at this for me. I mean, I've got a whole department that's all they do is it's price stuff, most of which off of napkins.
Well, and another issue, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, people want to pay less and less for design. They think it's just so simple, and well, you have CAD and just throw a bunch of stuff in there. And
I can't tell you how many people who are like, well, I have a floor plan. I was like, well, that's great. That doesn't tell me how you're going to build it.
Right. Let's submit that to the building department and see what they say.
I'm sure they'll figure it out. Your 6-page designs.
In Maine,
Right,
it'll be fine.
Yeah, but the biggest problem is everybody thinks it's real cheap and it's really easy. And architects are tired of it. And they say, well, you want to pay X amount of dollars. This is what you get for it. So then the contractors are trying to figure that design out, and then the RFIs start. And once the building starts, RFIs and resubmissions and all that costs them extra money. So they try and get all of this out in the initial design because that's all they want to pay for, but they don't realize that they didn't pay for a total design.
And then they're wondering why I'm having to submit RFIs to the architect because I don't know how something goes together and I'm not the one being paid to design it.
Correct.
Rick, that is so smart. One of the big revolutions.
Draw it up front.
Go ahead, Bob.
During the contract administration, I say you can either draw everything out up front, or you can detail it and finish the design during the contract administration phase. So it's a matter of where you're spending your money. And a lot of the architects have been getting their fees cut just like everybody else. So they draw less and less, and then hope that we just figure it out. But if not, they said it's like, well, why should I draw it? If I have to, I'll figure it out in the contract administration phase. Maybe they won't ask for that detail. Maybe they'll just do what they think is right, and that doesn't always work out.
Totally true. We started a design department a couple of years ago, and it's really revolutionized my thinking about what should and should not be included in architectural drawings. Because now I'm paying for every single one of those drawings.
What we're finding more and more is that it's not so much the architect schematic that we need, it's that we need the structural and we need the mechanical. And if we can get a client on board to pay for that whole package before we get a proposal together, we can give a very accurate proposal. But unfortunately, at the schematic stage, we really still have to be broad strokes because we're still choosing between 3 different window packages. We're still determining whether or not we can actually condition it with forced air if it's going to have to be 6 different mini split heads, because there's steel beams dividing up the space, which means we can't run anything through any of the joist bays, and the client doesn't want soffit work. So it really makes it challenging from the builder side to even provide pricing to the architect that's doing the right thing and coming to us and saying, what is this going to cost? My client said their budget is this. Can we do that? Like, maybe. Can we do it with a bunch of soffit work? Because then yes. But if not, I don't know. We need the structure. We need the mechanical. And then we can say it's going to cost this. Oh, and by the way, it's still going to be cost plus because the commodities market is going to kill us all.
I need essentially a permit set before we can even start to give firm pricing.
Ballparks, all ballparks
all ballparks until then.
S&S, stamped and sealed.
I totally agree. There's no reason to have the builder involved in schematic design when you still have 500 iterations of something. But it is good to get them involved in, okay, this is how I'm thinking about building it. Have you done this? Have you done that? Whatever. Because everybody, I mean, you can do a really complete set of drawings, and if you put it out to bid, they're going to build it 6 different ways. You have 6 different contractors, they're going to build it 6 different ways, right? So it's good if we don't have to draw it 6 different ways. Like if I know you and I've worked with you before, I'm like, yeah, hey, you're going to build double stud walls. We're going to put double stud walls in here, right? And so that's helpful to the first iteration is, what do you know how to do? What don't you know how to do? Are we all on the same page? Then we draw that, we do the structure, we do a rough mechanical, like, oh my God, okay, we've got LVLs in here. There's no way to get to the basement. I'm not sure. Don't put my water heater over there, kind of stuff. And then ask for pricing, right? And it is a permit level set. At that point, you should be able to go to the building department. I mean, in Maine, some of them you can go to with a napkin sketch, but everywhere but Portland. Sorry, Portland. I don't mean to disappoint you, but your permit process sucks. Everywhere else, you should be able to go to and say, hey, this is what I have. What else do you need? Whatever. But
we're getting near the end of the show. Do we have a couple chat box questions we can knock out real quick before final thoughts? Is there anything burning you up there, Ben? I was looking at it and I saw the question, how does remodeling differ between residential and commercial? I didn't even think about residential remodeling. Is that a thing, Rick? Bob, help me out. Doug?
What do you mean? Is it a thing?
In terms of
yes.
Yes.
Okay. It sure is. How about a tenant fit out in commercial?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I mean, I had to go into an Apple store and demo it out, and those are bulletproof. I mean, they overbuild the hell out of an Apple store. And I mean, the demo took 2.5 times longer than anticipated. Of course, we got some reimbursement for that, but that deadline, that end date has not changed. So we go into, my project manager and I, twice a week, we are revamping that schedule to make up days, to make up hours, to add a weekend. Like the flooring subcontractors ask, can we come in over the weekend and lay flooring? I say, yes, by all means. There's nobody in there. We can get it done. You won't be on a ladder. You won't hit a sprinkler head. If you're on a ladder, then you're fired because you're not a flooring subcontractor. But yeah, so yeah, it is. It's different. You're not in somebody's home, but it is the remodel is.
I think
it is.
Yeah, what you're trying to say here is no matter what, remodels are always more expensive and more complicated because you have no idea what's behind that wall or how complicated it's going to be or what you're going to find, right?
Absolutely. And I'm on the second floor of this mall, and you have to, when you do plumbing, you have to get into the ceiling of the tenant below you. You have to get a clearance to do that. There are so many more complications. There are mall rules and regulations. You can't have a dumpster outside. You can have a dumpster between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. and then it has to be hauled off, and at $500 or $450 a pop, instead of having, and it doesn't matter how full it is, And then you have trash that builds up inside the store that you have to relocate. And places like Walnut Creek, California the police department will issue you a ticket if you make noise before 7 a.m. Not the building department, the police department. And it's just a different world. It really, I mean, nobody can work before then in Walnut Creek. In fact, nobody can work weekends, holidays, and in fact, you can't work at all in California. You don't ever work there.
Yeah, Rick brought up an interesting point when he said a few minutes ago, you're not standing in somebody's house. And as somebody who did residential remodeling when I got out of college and had clients who stood in their kitchen and cried because, they didn't think their cabinets were going to be that dark, or they, had a water leak and it, dripped on little Susie's, homework and, that kind of stuff. The one good thing about commercial, and don't get me wrong, I had a commercial client cry on me one time too, but I think it was because she had issues. It's more transactional. If you get a water leak and it drips on somebody's desk, yeah, you might have to pay for a computer keyboard that blew out. It's a whole lot different than when it's in somebody's house and they're screaming because, it's dripping and they're going to have their kid's birthday party tomorrow and that kind of stuff. So it's more transactional versus relational. And hopefully
Funny story.
That.
Oh yeah, we heard that. Funny story.
Okay.
Monterey, California, 21 years ago. I'm sorry, 31 years ago. Our plumber, we were at the end of the line of this DWV, the sewer line. And we did some alterations in a high-end shoe store below us in their ceiling. Off hours, we had everything had to have everything buttoned up, cleaned up before the store opened. We did. They put a test ball in the line to make sure that it would hold. Then the plumber, this was in Monterey, California. Then the plumbers went back to Los Angeles after they passed the inspection. They didn't stay until the next day. They didn't tell me that they left the test ball in that line. So the 3 to 4 stores upline from me, people would use their bathroom. And they noticed three or four stores down that their toilet was backing up. So they brought in Roto-Rooter. And they went all the way down that line. There was over 120 feet of line, and they chewed through that test ball, and everything came down into the ceiling of the upscale shoe store below us. Yeah, I walked in the door and I turned around and walked out and threw up.
A shitty job, Rick.
Hey, wasn't my fault. Hey, did you guys pass inspection? Yeah. Did you button everything up? Is everything? Yes, it is. Now, is it my fault for not going down and verifying? Absolutely. But their insurance paid for it, ours didn't.
Yeah, that's way worse than my story. We were doing a commercial project and we had all the sprinkler heads covered because we were doing a project, and they forgot to put a head back in the library, and they flooded the library on the 3rd floor. Not so good. But it wasn't sewage.
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
take water any day.
Yeah, but if you've never worked with an active sprinkler system that's been in place for a long period of time doing renovations, you see it on TV when a fire goes off and a nice clean water sprays out of the sprinkler head, and when the fire goes out, the sprinkler shuts off. That doesn't really happen. They don't stop until somebody shuts the water off. Number one. Number two, that water is the blackest, smelliest stuff you've ever encountered because it's been sitting in that line.
Disgusting stuff, and it just keeps gushing. I mean, gallons and gallons and gallons.
Now,
I was gonna say, so now that residential construction makes you do it really scares the crap out of me, because that tank in your basement that's never had water out of it for like how long? Like, no thanks.
Yeah, I don't think the CPVC picks up the filth like the black iron pipe does, though.
Just a little pond algae.
They do make tools, by the way. One looks like a vice grip, and there's another that has a hook and a knob that you can turn, but they're meant specifically for sprinkler head brakes. And you can mitigate a lot of the damage if you have one on site and somebody doesn't mind getting wet, which is a whole lot cheaper than freaking out or not knowing where the fire riser room or the valve is. But yeah, and somebody has to be the hero and climb the ladder to get this mechanism into place. But it costs about $100, but it's worth every dollar.
How many times have you had to do it, Rick?
Not me. I watched somebody else. I said, look, you need to crawl up that ladder right there. And
That's a good boss right there. Spoken like a true boss.
You
need to climb up there and turn that off.
That's right. Well, so an electrician on the job about a month ago ran into a sprinkler pipe. We were above a Johnston and Murphy store, and he snapped it off at the threads, and then he reached out and grabbed it and tried to put it back in position so it wouldn't spray anymore. But after about 15 seconds, I said, dude, it's lost. Get down, go get the shop vac. I mean, we have some work to do. But he tried. So
yeah.
A for effort.
So I hate to interrupt the show, but of course we are at 7:30. So Kylie might kill us if we keep going. There's so much to unpack here and so much to talk about. And I appreciate all three of you for coming on tonight. I will give you one last minute. What's your last thought on the whole commercial to residential aspect? Doug, you're on the top of my screen, so you can go first.
I was going to go first and say I've already talked enough.
All right. Fair point.
The cop out.
So Rick, since Bob's not showing up on my screen, you get to go next.
I don't think, and I don't care if it's commercial or residential, there's no such thing as too much internal documentation. Regardless of what you require your subcontractors to do, you have to be on top of it. You have to take pictures. You have to take notes. Everything has a date stamp these days. So if you can document, before you cover something up with drywall, anything, everything, they make thumb drives now. You can store everything. So in 10 years, when you go back to remodel the place, you have that documentation. Or if you go to court.
I 100% agree with that. And I think I'm going to throw this out there to go with what you just said, Rick, is as an architect, even if you get valued engineered off the site, it is important for you to be there during construction to see what's happening. So Bob, close us out.
All right. So to kind of piggyback on what Rick said, if you have not spent the $300 for a Ricoh 360-degree camera and a tripod, you need to do that like tomorrow, because you can document an entire project in probably 15 minutes. And if you do that once a week, and you do it before you close walls up, or before you do your drywall, or before when you encounter something unusual, you need to make sure everybody understands what's going on. It is the best $300 you will ever spend. Documented from
I ordered mine yesterday, Bob.
Good, because I got the Amazon affiliate link and I got the free cents from your order.
Oh, I didn't use your link. I explicitly didn't use yours. Use Colbert's.
Everybody,
somebody bought one. No, I'm kidding. I don't get paid for that. That's the total freebie for you.
That's awesome. You guys can reach out to Bob afterwards and find out how to pick up one of those. Thank you guys all for joining us tonight. We could talk for another hour and a half. I appreciate your time and the investment that you've put into tonight's show. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.